figuring out your basal or your long-acting insulin regimen is one of the most important things about managing type 1 diabetes. Your basal, your long-acting insulin, is the bedrock of your management because whether you got your bolus right or not, you won't really be able to tell unless your basal is correct. See, the basal regimen is basically the insulin that your body needs throughout the day. Whether you're sleeping, whether you're working, whether you're eating or not, this insulin is always running throughout your system throughout the day to take care of other activities. Because insulin isn't just for carbs, it's also used for muscle growth, for hormones, for a whole host of things, and your body needs a constant supply of it. So if you're a type 1 diabetic like me and your body just isn't making insulin anymore, you need to take basal insulin, aka that long-acting insulin, in order to cover that. So your basal is very important, and getting it right is incredibly important. Today, I'm going to go over that. I'm going to go over how to test your basal with fasting. Fasting sounds like a very scary concept that garners pictures of Mahatma Gandhi or Jesus living without food for 40 days where you're starving yourself. But really, fasting is actually incredibly easy. In fact, we basically fast every single night. That's why they call breakfast breakfast, because you're breaking the fast that you were in when you were sleeping. And you don't have to do a long fast in order to test your basal. Now, why do you need to fast to test your basal? Because you need to get rid of as many variables as possible in order to see what your baseline is. If you have a bunch of stuff in the way, like your bolus from the meal you just ate, the carbs from the meal you just ate, and a whole host of other factors like exercise and everything else, if you have a bunch of stuff in the way, then you won't be able to see your baseline because all this extra stuff is covering it up and might be having a different impact. You want to get rid of all that and just have an easy day where you're not doing much exercise, where you're not doing much strenuous, stressful activity, where you're not eating anything, in order to find that baseline and know exactly the bedrock you need to have in place that you can build your bolus, you can build your exercise regimen, and everything else on top of. How long do you need to do a fast in order to test your basal? Well, depends. If you're splitting your basal into 2 doses a day, like Bernstein recommends, then you might be able to get away with doing a 12-hour fast, and that's actually fairly easy. To figure out your nighttime basal, just skip supper. To figure out your daytime basal, just skip breakfast or lunch. Easy. But ideally, what you want to do is fast for a whole 24 hours, or maybe even longer than that. I know it seems very difficult, but once you're following a low-carb approach, this is actually really easy. Because when you're going low-carb, you're burning fat for fuel, and fat is able to fuel your body much longer than carbs do. So once you make that switch and your body is more fat adapted, fasting actually comes very simply. So try to do that 24-hour fast, because if you fast for a whole 25 hours, if you're not doing any physical activity or anything too strenuous for that whole day, then you'll be able to see exactly what your basal is doing and only what your basal is doing. Now, before you do this, be sure to not have any insulin on board. Don't take a ton the night before. Try to go through the night with normal blood sugars, and that way you'll be able to start your day right with normal blood sugars and see what happens. You don't need to change anything. Now, what are the rules of this basal fast? Again, try fasting for 24 hours. That's the first step. But once you're doing this fast, what you want to not do, obviously, is eat anything. If your blood sugar goes low and you need to correct it, that's fine. Correct your blood sugar. Don't just stay low. But that does mean your basal fast is over. You need to try again later. But that's not a bad thing, because if your blood sugar ends up going low on a basal fast, that means your basal is too high, and you should try lowering it. That means you actually learned something there. That's very important. Likewise, if your blood sugar goes too high, let's say it goes past 140, that means your basal is too low and you need to raise it. And that does also mean you need to take some insulin to correct that, and thus your basal fast session has come to a stop. That's okay. You learn something from that. That's the whole point, right? And that's basically all there is to it. It's actually fairly simple. Just don't eat, take your basal, see what happens. If your basal goes too low during the day when you're not eating, that must mean that your basal rate is too high and you need to lower it. If your blood sugar goes too high during the day and you're not eating or doing anything strenuous, if it goes too high, that means your basal rate is too low and you need to raise it. So you fast, you see if your blood sugar goes up or down or stays normal, and you change your regimen appropriately the next day in order to fix that. Now keep this in mind. You don't want to correct too much in one direction or the other. You don't want to go from 5 units of basal to 10 units of basal. You want to take things slow because you don't want to risk going too low or going too high based on what you're doing during that fast. You don't want to overcorrect. So keep it slow, keep it steady, take time with it, be patient, and eventually you'll find that number that'll keep you at that flat line all day. And once you do, you'll be able to figure out your bolus, you'll be able to figure out your exercise, you'll be able to figure out everything else because you know your baseline is solid. Now, how often should you do a basal fast? Well, you should do it based on need, obviously. If you notice that you're going too low too often, you're going too high too often, and you don't think it's your bolus, then you might need to check your basal and try a basal fast. Some people do this once a month, some people do this even once a week to figure everything out. And I know that might be strenuous and difficult, but it's worth it in order to obtain normal blood sugars and obtain that flat line. Other factors that might contribute to this are if you change your eating patterns. So for example, once you go low carb, your eating is going to be different, your body metabolism is going to be different, the amount of insulin you need might change as well. So that would be a good time to do a basal fast. Likewise, if you're a woman and your insulin needs change during your time of the month, that might be a good time to do a basal fast as well in order to see what your insulin needs change to during that time of the month. There are other reasons as well, but you just have to play it by ear. You have to keep a good eye on that blood sugar and see what happens. Now, one last tip about basal fasting that I should have mentioned before is actually very important is when you do a basal fast, test constantly. You want to test at least once an hour. Now, I know that might seem expensive unless you have a CGM and you see that line anyways, which is perfect for a basal fast. It might be expensive, but there are plenty of plans you can get where you can actually get unlimited strips. And so doing a basal fast in such a way is actually incredibly doable, and it's also incredibly worth it. Because again, once you have that baseline established, then you can figure out everything else and keep things at normal blood sugar levels, and finally tame that type 1. That's all I have for now. Be sure to try a basal fast and get your basal regimen figured out once and for all. And be sure to do whenever you need to, maybe even frequently, in order to find that flat line in order to tame that type 1.